What's going on, guys? My name is Wyatt, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to disassemble a 6.6 liter Duramax motor. The current one, or the one that we are working on today, is an LB7 style motor, but this is relatively the same for any LLY, LBZ, LMM, or LML motor. The only differences are the cylinder heads, the fuel injectors, and some wiring. But as far as the short block of the motor, they are all the same. So I'm going to show you the little bit of a difference between the cylinder heads on the LB7 and later trucks, and then we're going to jump in to turn this thing down. So as I was saying, there's a few notable differences between the LB7 and any later model year motor. On the LB7, the most notable of which is the cylinder head and injector design. On the LB7, to change injectors, you have to remove both the upper and lower valve cover, which is a two-piece valve cover, so you have to remove both of those to put injectors in this motor, which is a pain in the butt. Book time on doing an injector job on LB7s is about 13 hours, where on any newer motor, LLY and up, the book time on them is only about 8 hours. So I'm going to grab an LMM valve cover setup and show you guys just a little bit of the difference between the early model LB7 and their later years of the Duramax motor. So as you can see here, I have a LB7 valve cover and a LMM valve cover. The LMM valve covers are pretty identical to any of the LBZs, LLYs, or LMLs, and the LB7 is the only Duramax motor with this style valve cover on it. So what's nice about the LMM valve cover is you can remove the entire valve cover without taking it apart, even though it's still a two-piece design. On the LB7s, you have to take off the upper valve cover so that you can get access to the electronics underneath, and then you can remove the lower valve cover. You also have to remove both of these to do injectors, where on the LMMs or LLBZs, LLYs, or LMLs, you do not have to remove the valve cover to do injectors. So yeah, there's the little bit of difference between the two. So let's get back to it. And in case I forgot to mention, this is about a 5 to 6 beer project, so you want to make sure to hit the liquor store, get your favorite beverages loaded up in the fridge, and invite your buddies over. Alright, now that we've gone over the differences between the LB7 and later model year motors, we're going to go ahead and start tearing this thing down. So I'm going to start with removing the fan, the AC compressor, the upper coolant pipe, the engine harness, and the glow plug controller. When I'm done removing those, we will go on to the next step. So as you guys can see, I have gotten the fan off, the AC compressor off, the upper radiator pipe off, and the glow plug controller off. For the fan, that is a 47mm nut. Those can be really tricky to get off as they do get very seized up over time. But like I said, 47mm nut, it is not left-hand thread, so it is lefty-loosey. As far as the AC compressor, it is 4 15mm bolts up top here. On the upper radiator coolant pipe deal, it is a 12mm bolt here and two 12mm bolts both here and here. And for the glow plug controller, those are also 12mm nuts holding the glow plug controller on these two studs, and then 12mm nuts holding on these cables that go to the glow plug, or go to the glow plug rails. So now that we have those off, we're going to start working on removing the wiring harness. So getting started on the wiring harness, up front of the motor, you can see we have our cam and crank position sensors right here. Those both need unplugged. Coming around to the side, we have two grounds on the side of the motor that need undone as well. Those are 14mm bolts, as well as a 14 here holding the wiring harness on the side of the block. Moving up a little bit, we have a nut right here. This is an 8mm. It is for the glow plugs. Go ahead and remove that. If you haven't already, there is a bracket here and a thickum. You need to remove those. These connectors, you just pull out these tabs and they will release. I've already gone ahead and removed that just for simplicity. And then coming over here, we have our injector connectors. You need to unplug these. These are only on LB7, this style is. On LLYs and newer, they all plug into the individual injectors. And same with the glow plugs, they all have their own individual pigtails going down to those. So, like I said, this is kind of the same for most of the motors, but there are some slight differences. So let's go ahead and start taking that off. Alright, now we almost have the entire wiring harness removed. The last thing we need to do is unhook this power line right here that goes to the intake air heater. Typically it is a 10mm nut, but somebody has put something else on this one. As you can see right there in the center, this here. So we're going to pull this off. You guys can go back in one of my earlier videos on this channel. I actually show you how to delete this intake air heater. It is not for cold starts on these diesels. It is more of an emissions item, and it also is a big air blockage in the intake system. So go ahead and check out that video once you're done watching this one if you want to learn how to get rid of that. And just like that, the entire wiring harness is removed off of this motor. Alright, now we're going to remove the two front accessory brackets and the pulley for our fan clutch. But before we can do that, we need to come over here to the left side of the motor. On an LB7, there is two 12mm nuts holding on a port to test fuel pressure. So we need to remove those beforehand, and then we can work on the front brackets. Now the brackets themselves are held on with 13 different 14mm bolts. So once we have this port removed, we're going to go ahead and pull all those out and pull these brackets off. Okay, now that we have the bracketry off the front of the motor, we're going to remove the thermostat housing. So in order to do so, we need to come on the left side here. We have two 12mm bolts that need removed. Once we have those out of the way, we will remove these two here. These are also 12mm bolts, and that will allow us to remove the oil fill. Once that is off, we're going to pull this rubber line out of our way. This goes to the turbo from the coolant bypass pipe. Once that is off, we can remove the two 12mm bolts down here. Take this out along with this when we pull it loose. It is held on by four 12mm bolt or nuts on this side and four on this side. So let's go ahead and get those removed. So at this point in the video, you can see we have the front of the motor pretty well disassembled, and now we need to start working on the top of the motor so that we can remove the heads. So this is where it's going to vary from motor to motor, but like I said, this is an LB7, so I'm going to show you exactly how to do it for this motor. But don't be discouraged, the LOY in anything newer is pretty similar. There's just some small different things, but like I said, pretty similar, so this will give you a good idea of what to do if you're working on one of those motors. So to begin, we're going to remove the intake horn off of this turbo, and then we are going to start removing some of the fuel lines and get this Y bridge out of here. Now, you'll want to make sure when you're tearing this all apart to take pictures or label what order everything came off, because when you go to reassemble this, some of these lines have to go on first before others, otherwise they won't fit back on the motor correctly. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and start removing the 3 10mm bolts that hold the intake horn onto this turbo.
Six hours later.
As you can see, I finally got the 3rd bolt out of this intake pipe. Any LB7 owners that have ever had to take that off know how big of a pain in the butt that is. Unfortunately, the LB7 was like the bastard child of Duramax's because of that freaking bolt and their injector design. So, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and move on. So next on the list is to remove these injector feed lines. These are 19mm. I recommend using a line wrench on these, not just a open wrench, as you can round the corners on them pretty easily, and you'll need to torque them down to 32 foot-pounds when you put them back together. Something else to keep in mind when you break these loose is they're going to drop a bunch of dirt and grime down into the injector itself. The reason it does that is because these barrel nuts don't have anything to seal them off from the elements. So when stuff settles down in here like dirt and grime, like I said, it'll settle down into the barrel nut, and when you break it loose, it's going to knock all that stuff down into the injector. So you'll want to make sure to clean out the injector very well, or send it off to have it professionally cleaned, or put in new injectors. If you leave that stuff in there, it's going to cause a ton of issues and completely ruin your injector, and probably cause it to stick open, which can lead to even more issues. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Make sure you do a good job of cleaning those out when you have it apart. So let's go ahead and remove those from both sides. Alright, so as you can see, we got all the fuel lines off the top of the motor, so now we can start removing some of the intake stuff. All we need to do to take these cylinder heads off is remove the Y bridge, and then we should have enough room to pull the heads off without taking out the turbo just yet. So these have 4 10mm bolts on each side. The bottom 2 are nuts and the top 2 are bolts, so we're going to go ahead and remove those and go from there. Well, we're getting there. Next order of business is we need to remove the valve covers so we can get access to the head studs to pull the cylinder heads off. Again, this is going to vary depending on what motor you're working on, and since this is an LB7, it's a little bit more complicated than any of the other motors. So, there is a bunch of 5mm Allen head bolts that need to come out from the upper valve cover. Once we have that removed, we need to undo the electronics for the injectors, which are underneath the valve cover, the upper valve cover that is. And once we have all that removed, we can go ahead and remove the lower portion of the valve cover. So let's go ahead and jump into that. At this point, you can see the electronics that would be here for the injectors. I have already removed the injectors from this motor, but these are 7mm nuts. You will remove these from all the injectors, and then there is two 10mm nuts holding both of these brackets for the electronics on. So go ahead and remove those, and then we can start on the lower valve cover. Next, we're going to remove the rocker assembly. There is a lot of tension on these, so you want to make sure to work from the outside in, very slowly removing the bolt. There are 5 14mm that we need to remove. Another thing to keep in mind when pulling valve train parts apart, you want to put everything back where it was, as all of the machine surfaces are mated to their counterparts. So it's just always a good rule of thumb that if you pull the rocker bridge off of this one, you should put it back onto this one. So go ahead and remove those. Make sure you have a good way of keeping these in order. You'll want to make sure to do that with the push rods as well. Another good tip with these is to pull them so they unseat from the lifter and let them drain all the oil out real quick, as there's a lot of oil built up in these, and if you go and pull it out, it's going to drip all over your floor. So just give them a second, pull it out of the cup to let them drain, and then we'll go ahead and remove those. Now that I have everything out of the way and the push rods out and lined up in order of how they came out, we can get access at the head studs. Now these are 12.17mm bolts, and we're going to work from the outside in, breaking them all loose. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Along with all the head bolts, there are also 4 bolts up top here that need to be removed. I have already removed these center 2, and I'm just using these outer 2 to hold the head on the motor. But you do need to take those out as well. They're 6mm Allen. I have also gone ahead and pulled the glow plugs out of the motor and also pulled the exhaust manifolds off so that I can set these upright on the exhaust side, and they will take up less space that way. Now with all the head bolts removed and the exhaust manifold off, we are ready to remove the cylinder head. Be careful on these trucks. There is a coolant line right here by the intake runner that is close, but you can still finagle the head out of the way with that being in there. So I'm going to remove my 2 bolts that I had holding the head on. And you're simply going to lift up on the head. It needs to raise about a ½ inch to come off the dowel pins, and then we can remove the entire cylinder head. Just like that. Now that we have the cylinder heads off of the motor, we're going to remove the turbo. There is 3 17mm bolts that need to be removed, and then 2 12mm nuts, and 1 more 12mm bolt. So we'll get those pulled out, and the turbo will come right off this thing. Alright, so now that we have the motor upside down, we need to remove this plug for the low oil sensor. So to do so, underneath here there is a little tab, and all you have to do is press up on that tab and it will release the little locks on the side. As you can see them there, it's pushed up and released, and then you can just go ahead and pull this thing loose. Sometimes it'll get hung up, so you just got to press on it really hard and it'll pull free. After that, there is a bunch of 10mm bolts, so we're going to remove those and pull the pan off. Next order of business is we are going to pull out this oil pickup tube. There's two 12mm nuts here and two 12mm bolts down there to remove this. Then we're going to pull all the rods off of the crank and see what is going on there. So I got all the rods taken out now. I did not film any of that just because it is very time consuming. But anyways, really simple, just two 14mm bolts per rod. You take the cap off, you tap it out of the cylinder. So onto the rods. They weren't too bad. There was a couple with a little bit of more wear than I'd like to see on them, but otherwise I can't really complain. And there was only one broken ring. It was an oil ring on one of the pistons. So it is what it is. Hopefully we can get the main caps off of this thing and the crank isn't too messed up, because I really don't want to put any money into this thing to get it back together. So yeah, next order of business is we are going to pull the harmonic balancer off. Just know that these bolts are torqued to a godly amount, so what we need to do is put two bolts in the back of the crank and use a pry bar to hold it still, while we use probably a 4-foot cheater bar on the front of the crank to take that bolt loose. Alright, next to come off is the oil pump gear and the reluctor on the crankshaft. So for the oil pump gear, it's a 19mm nut and it is lefty loosey, so normal thread, at least on an LB7. So go ahead, pull that off. You can pull this gear off. Now when removing this reluctor ring off of this crankshaft, you'll want to make sure to not pry on this ring whatsoever, but this is just a slip fit. So get a pry bar on the very bottom back side of it and try to pry it forward without bending the reluctor. So if we can do this here. Just like that. Unfortunately on this motor, it's a very common issue, as you can see right down there on the crankshaft, that it has a broken pin. And like I said, this is a very common issue on these Duramaxes, to snap off this crankshaft pin right here. So I'm gonna have to fix that before I put this motor back together. Next thing to do is remove the oil pump. It is just 4 6mm Allen bolts holding this in. So we're going to go ahead and pull all these out real quick. And just like that, the oil pump comes off. We're going to have to go through this very carefully and make sure that there are no shavings in here. And whether we build this motor or not really determines when we get the main caps off and how bad the mains are. Next, we're going to remove the camshaft. So we're going to pull out these 6 bolts. They are 10mm. And pull this plate off. Oh, there's one more. Alrighty, and then what we're going to do is spin this so that we can get to these 2 6mm Allens that hold the cam plate on. We're going to remove those. Alright, now the crank should just, or the camshaft should just pull straight out. You'll want to make sure to be really gentle with it and try and pull it as straight as you can so you don't nick any of the lobes. And just like that, a massive camshaft. Next, we're going to remove the main caps off of the crank, and we're going to start by removing the outside bolts that hold these caps. So these are 17mm, and then the caps themselves are a 12.14mm. So, like I said, go ahead and start by removing all the outside, I forget what they're called, the bolts that go into the side of the main cap, help strengthen the block, but we're going to remove those first, and then we will move on to the main caps themselves. So as you can see, I have broken all of the main caps loose. I'm going to pull these off just to look at the main bearings. Unfortunately, we cannot pull the crank out right now because the backing plate is still on the motor. And to pull the crank out, we have to remove the backing plate so it will release the back of the motor, or the back of the crankshaft. But like I said, I'd like to take a peek at the main bearings and see which one is trashed and see if this crank is even worth a dang. So I'm going to pull these off and we will inspect the bearings real quick. Alright, so I have the number 2 bearing cap off now, and I've gotten down to where I wanted to be. As you can see, this cap has a ton of heat in it. You can see how it's all discolored through here, which means there's just been a ton of heat put into that cap. And if you look down there at that bearing, anybody that knows something about motors knows that the bearing should not be flayed out like it is on the sides there. And also, you can see that split in the bearing there. Well, that's supposed to be lined up with the block half and the cap half. It shouldn't be freely to spin, or it shouldn't be free to spin on the crank like this. So I need to get these apart, get these bearing halves off of this and see if this crank is even worth a dang. My best bet is it's not, so I'll end up having to find a crank for this motor. But that's all the further I am going to go in this video. That's actually all the further I wanted to get onto the motor tonight, to just see the internal health of it, and obviously it's going to take a little bit more to get it ready than what I initially expected. For everybody who is following this to the end to actually see how you get this motor completely apart, what you would do next is there's some bolts over here for the oil cooler. You would take these all off and this whole unit will come off as one piece. If you were wondering what this is, on the 01 and 02 motors, this is the oil pressure sensor. On 03 and 04 LB7 motors, it's over here or here on one of these oil galleys, and it just uses a different sensor and the wiring's a little bit different there. But otherwise, those are the really only other main differences there. And then on the back side of the motor, you will need to take it off of your engine stand and pull all of these, I believe 17mm bolts out of this backing plate. and that will allow you to take off the rest of the main caps and be able to pull the crankshaft out. So yeah, so here's a little bit better look at what is actually wrong with the motor. So I've pulled out a couple bearings, and here is the first one. As you can see, it is very badly worn, but it is not deformed or anything, and you know, it looks like a normal bearing would be. If it were in better shape, that would be nice, but it ain't. So here is another bearing I pulled out, and this thing straight up looks like an hourglass, and as you can see, it's got slight shoulders on it as it's been mushroomed out. And then you get onto the really cool bearings. So this one is out of the number 3 journal, and as you can see, this thing is mushroomed and completely trashed. So unfortunately, this whole motor is pretty much a goner, or at least the bottom end is, because the crank is messed up. These caps are probably warped because they have so much heat put in them. And yeah, unfortunately, to get this motor back up and running, it will need a new crankshaft and some new caps. And if we go to that route, we're gonna have to live bore it and make sure all that's good to go as well. So at this point, I don't know what we'll do. Maybe we'll just rebuild the other motor and have this one for spare parts. But like I said, that's all the further I'm going to get in this video on this motor, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, please leave them down in the comments below. Right before we end the video, I figured I'd explain why those bearings are like they are. As I said, this is a very common issue to have this pin snap off, and what that pin does is it spins the gear that in turn would spin the oil pump. So, as common sense would put it, if you don't have anything spinning your oil pump is not moving any oil, and therefore your bearings are running dry. So I always tell people, keep an eye on your oil pressure gauge, and if it quits working, don't think it's a bad sensor. Make sure to check it out and always fix the issue before it gets worse. So like I said, that'll be the end of this video. If you guys liked it, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel if you have not. If you guys have any comments or questions about this motor or anything Duramax related, make sure to leave them down in the comments. And with that being said, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.